New Hope on Sunday morning is a special place to be. I hope you'll agree. The opportunity to simply be involved and participating in what we're doing and sharing in the encouragement. Sometimes you have a plan. Every Sunday I have a specific plan of what we should do together in our brief moments, and I take it very seriously, and I do a lot of preparation in anticipating where we'll be in the month of September. I'm in mid-September now in my planning and trying to lay things out very carefully so that when you're here, your time's not wasted. I feel very responsible for the 20 to 30 minutes that I speak on Sunday morning, but sometimes things happen. Like this week and this morning, I'm reflecting on, we try to act as if we understand how God works. And then things like the events of Colorado happen this week, which totally destroy any kind of sense of, okay, so you think you're that arrogant that you know what's going on? Watch this piece of evil come walking out across the platform of life. So with those things in the background, I keep myself very humble before the Lord, and I pray before you to sense that say, okay, this passage explains some of the nature of how God works. But let's never be so in love with ourselves or our own intellect or our own understanding that we think we have it all figured out. Because I'm here to tell you as one person, I don't have it all figured out. God does, and that's why my faith is in Him and not in the power of my mind. I hope that you're there with me and all of that. This morning's emphasis, however, dutifully planned and appropriately charted, I believe, can be found in the old text that we've been looking at for so many weeks now from 1 Chronicles. And this morning's theme is about a divine legacy. And what does it really mean to leave this divine legacy? Being completely conformed to the image of Jesus Christ is a goal for each Christian. And although the transformation is happening gradually, and I wish it happened instantaneously, being adopted among many brothers is a really high and holy goal. The minute you become a Christian, you have a new and fresh, intimate relationship. You become wealthy, not because you have an increased bank account, but because you are heir to all the great riches of Christ. Now, some people are put off by the adoption images in Paul's language. And again, this is tough to explain in some people's mind and imagination. So I want to give it some extra emphasis this morning because it's about the theme of legacy that comes out of this passage from 1 Chronicles and what we know as chapter 22 and just a portion of that chapter. The one passage that really has troubled many people about leaving a legacy is that piece that is found dropped in the pages of the New Testament from the writings of the pen of the Apostle Paul. I'm with our brother Peter, by the way, who said, our brother Paul has written many difficult things. So if you're with me in that, here's one that has troubled many people for years. And it has, again, the theme of adoption and legacy. My encouragement to you is this. Christ has left us a legacy. And that legacy can be explained in many ways and is hinted at in numerous passages in the pages of the New Testament, but especially in this one, which is found from Paul's pen in Romans, the church to the letter at Rome. They're in the first century, and what we know is chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. You'll catch the context of it, I trust. We know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we eagerly, emphasis coming, eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. An individual, Tim Keller, helped me write a commentary on this, and he clarified the thought ever so much more than I had previously. And I thought it was just, the insight was so clear. I'd like to share it with you in this idea of leaving a legacy. He said that he talked to so many women who were particularly put off by this passage. Because why couldn't the passage simply say, as we eagerly await for our adoption as sons and daughters? Why is that missing? A lady, he said, in his congregation, he ministers in downtown New York City, said, oh, I understand that right away. She was from a Near Eastern European country, and she said, look, in my family, there's only one son. The rest of you are just everybody else, and especially are you everybody else as girls. Have that? She said, when I read this passage, my face just lit up and I was so excited. Because God looks at us without regard to male or female, slave or free, Jew or Greek, God sees us all because what does the Son receive? Everything in the inheritance. You hear that? The legacy Christ has left for us is the same legacy that the firstborn son would receive in the context of that first century world in which it was written. We receive, without regard to male or female, Greek or Jew, slave or free, all of the legacy that Christ leaves for us. That's why she said I was so excited about it. See, our adoption means that Christ loved us. We are honored like he is honored. We are treasured like he is treasured. Your circumstances cannot threaten that. The promise, in fact, is that the more that your circumstances are threatened, the more difficult that your life becomes, the worse the obstacles that you face, Christ's legacy to you becomes all the more important. Well, look, I think that's just such a crystal clear passage. Last wills and testaments. How are you doing on that? Are you doing what I'm doing? Don't do what I do. Continue to put it off? Don't do it. I think it's appropriate and wise to do it. I'm one of those people who continues to put it off for another day. I don't know why I do that. I'm not sure if I don't want to face my own mortality, or it just seems like an inconvenient way to spend money. But it's not something that I confess that I've done. The stuff of legacy is not something that which we often look into. We seem to avoid it rather like the plague. And yet I know that when I die, do you know what I'm leaving? All of it. Right? I mean, when I die, what I'm leaving is, by the way, that's what you're leaving too. Right? All of it. I would hope that if there's a few shekels left, that my children could at least go out for a trip to a McDonald's, okay? But given the circumstances of my finances and the state of the national economy and the conditions of health care in our nation, what do you mean you don't understand that 2,700-page document? What's wrong with you? I mean, just think about that. All right, no more political commentary. I'm sorry. Bad, Andy. Stop that kind of behavior, all right? The legacy that I hope my family will inherit are those high and holy and noble and decent things in my life that remind them of Christ. That's what I truly want them to inherit. That's the legacy that I would like to leave within the confines of my family. And I am glad to know that God works generationally. That is, he works beyond just me. He also plants things in my family that I have hopefully participated in being a positive example of and not merely a negative one. I hope that my children don't say, Dad always did that, and we never want to do that. I hope that my grandchildren don't say, Grandpa always did that, and I never want to do that. I hope that there's some positive characteristics in there, and maybe in your family too, whatever the family identifier you are, or aunt or uncle, or some of you in the category of great aunts and uncles now. Is that also, would that be fair to say? And maybe even some great-greats in there? I don't know. I guess I'm looking forward to that status someday. Look, in this passage then, in the Word of God, we find in 1 Chronicles, there's some keys to this legacy building. If you want to follow along, you can use the back of the worship bulletin there that you received in the door. And this emphasis begins in choosing wisely for a divine, that is a pleasing to God kind of legacy. There's a puzzling passage, though, a few verses right here in the very beginning we ought not to miss, because the first instruction in this whole legacy building is go out and get some aliens. And you may say, what? Now, I don't mean as in Space Invaders or E.T. the extraterrestrial. No, much more like in the legacy and with the transitions and the generational confusion that we see now going on in our own country. These understandings then of what it means to build a legacy are taught to David into the context of all. First, when you're going to have a legacy, David, because remember, David has captured the city. He's built so many of the great buildings now. He's handed off the building of the temple to his son Solomon. All these things are set in place. And the first thing that David says to his son Solomon is, go out and gather all the aliens together. Now that doesn't sound like the way you would begin, does it? Please say no, and I don't want to be the only odd one here. In fact, there are 28 specific references in the pages of the Old Testament about the ways that the people of God are to build their legacy and to build it in the relationship with the aliens who are in the land with them. Really. See, God always has a mind for something greater than yourself. You may think that your legacy is that which you should focus on. It's all about you and you and you. But God's building of legacy is always inclusive of the disenfranchised, the hurting, the powerless in society. So I just point out to you, as somebody who looks at the text and tries to press it for all it's worth, that in this initial passage and understanding of what it means, God always has a tenderness for the disenfranchised. God always wants you to have, as part of your legacy, a specific plan of reaching out for those who are hurting and who are desperate in society. A graphic outreach of the demonstration of those who are powerless in society. Now, some commentators feel that at this time, catch this now, some commentators feel that at this time in the history of the people of Israel, I know I'm riding this horse really hard right now, I just don't want you to miss this, that this number of aliens in the land, before this legacy building starts, they would have numbered over 150,000 people. Really? You mean you think that David here, who's getting ready to transition his kingship to his son, he's an old man, his hair is gray, if there's any hair left, right? His joints ache in the morning as he tries to rise. He does the same thing that most older old men do, right? Let me tell you how bad I hurt. Let me tell you how difficult it is. See, if that's the key that my family remembers about me, Dad always had a bad knee, Dad always had a bad back, that's the legacy. David passes on the legacy, this time getting it straight, that we will care for the desperate. We will care for the powerless. We will care for the alien. We will care for the hurting. So if you want to talk about building a son, this is kind of like an extra, I offer this to you at no extra charge, no extra credit. This is not part of the formal outline there in the worship bulletin. So if you want to write this, you have to write it off to the side. David is telling Solomon, son, listen to God. Listen to God's call to reach out to the poor. Son, follow God's instructions. Number two, follow God's instructions. So first is listen to God. Second is follow God's instructions. That is, you reach out to these aliens even as he has told me. Number three, son, consider my examples, both good and bad. Do you have good examples of things in your life? Yeah, come on, yes you do. Don't be a negative. Of course you have good examples of things in your life. But do you also have some poor ones? I put my hand up. You don't. See, I don't want, and let's say that you don't have children under your immediate care and influence, but you can still influence children. There's young people up and down these hallways. Wasn't that a treasure this morning? See, aren't you glad that we have a congregation in which the young people really do have a part? I mean, I don't know how special that was to you this morning or when you've done the announcement things, but we're trying to promote the value of our children, that we listen to them and we care about them. Do you know what a heritage that is for them to grow up with? To think that their church should care about young people. That's not a bad way to grow up, is it? See, because we were taught that, some of us think that that's exactly what should happen. Son, listen to God. Son, follow God's instructions. Son, consider my examples, both good and bad. Son, turn to God for wisdom. Don't try to walk completely in your own understanding. Son, work hard and lead purposefully. Okay, so this temple's going to be built. Solomon is being instructed. You read chapter 22, David's getting all this stuff all together, and things are coming together pretty well. But David is going to pass on also the leadership lessons of how you build this temple. Now, if you want to fill in the worship bulletin, here come the guidelines for leadership that flow from this passage. And again, this is where we find David in his life. He's an old man. His body is failing. His mind is not doing so well. Are any of you struggling with hearing? Do any of you struggle with that? Huh? You said? Yeah, I was speaking to you. The newest one in my family, I fell completely heir to this, happened to me just in a few moments in time. We were eating together over the 4th of July week, and I was seated next to my 5-year-old grandson, and we were having sloppy joes at dinner. Now, when you eat with a 5-year-old beside you, he's under the chair, he's under the table, he's upside down, he's backwards. And I thought he said to his mother one thing, but what he said was, "I want some more sloppy joes, Mom." Grandpa said, "Why do you want some more motorcycle clothes?" Sloppy joes, motorcycle clothes? Wow, okay. I'm going to hear about that for the rest of my life, okay, from my children, my son-in-law. There's things that you just don't hear anymore as you age. Hearing just goes away. It's obvious that my hair is receding, but it's not as obvious that my hearing is gone. However, I hope that I'm able to discern the voice of God a little more clearly than I am my 5-year-old grandson asking for sloppy joes, motorcycle clothes. Oh my goodness. Here are the guidelines for leadership. The first one is knowing your strengths. See, I know where my weaknesses are, but I also need to know where I am strong. When you're going to be in charge of leading a major project for God, or when you're going to be in charge of training up a child in the way they should go, or when you're going to be in charge of being responsible for a part of the life of a congregation, or helping in the community, you should know where your strengths are. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? David does know where his strength rests. It's in that personal relationship with God. Where else is your strength? Are you counting on your physical body to last forever? Are you counting on your hearing to never? I used to tell the kids, I'm just trying out for a bell tone ad, kids. That's all I'm doing here along the way. Knowing your strengths. You should identify, number 2, identify your stress points. Do you know what sets you off? Do you know what ticks you off? Can you identify if somebody says something that would send me, I would used to say, that'll cut my suspenders and I'll go straight up. If they do it that way, right? Because if you're going to be leading, again, at the massive level of building a temple, or of leading in a family, or influencing a neighbor for Christ, you should know where your stress points are and what happens within your heart when those events occur. First, knowing your strengths, identifying your stress points, and I encourage you in this way by naming any overwhelming attempts by the Satan to harm you. See, we never underestimate the significance. Was Satan active against David's life? Oh my goodness, friends, we've seen it. Throughout this summer months of looking in this text of Chronicles, we've seen the Satan influence him, and the passage we looked at just last week had Satan entering in David's heart, forcing him to go and count so that he could have the pride of ownership that I did it my way. You better be aware, if you're leading anything, from a small family to a neighborhood group to a community in the congregation, to any level, that Satan is out to wreck your very best plans. Don't miss that. And number 4, finally, by seeing leaders see roadblocks ahead. See, good leaders are not surprised. They anticipate the challenges of the day. They anticipate that there will be roadblocks out there. If you're doing a building project, let's see, would Jesus have said anything about that? Would Jesus say, go out and just start building a house? You don't need to count the money. Just go out and start building a house. Just start throwing in the foundation, throw up the walls, put the roof on it. Don't worry about the mechanicals. That's all the stuff that makes the house work, by the way. Jesus says it quite the oppositely, doesn't he? No one builds a house without counting the cost. He doesn't say, if they're wise. See, leaders know that there are roadblocks. And you might ask, well, Andy, I'm not quite getting this. And I apologize for not being as clear as I could be this morning. It's a troublesome passage. I'd ask you this, does this mean then, with this emphasis on David and Solomon and building a temple, that we're all supposed to go out and build temples? Is that the expectation of the passage here, that the Bible says, okay, now David, he gave it to his son, and he couldn't build the temple, so we're all supposed to go out and build giant temples. We're all supposed to go out and collect enormous amounts of money and bricks and mortar and all that kind of stuff and construct all these great edifices for God. That there are cathedrals to be built, after all. There are megachurch structures or small church structures that God says, this is what you should be doing. I would ask you to say, contrary, no, because if that was our task, I think Jesus would have told us that, wouldn't he? I take it that Jesus tells me everything that's important to do. I hope you agree with that. Jesus tells me what's important in life and what I should be doing. Jesus says not a word. I mean, how many words does Jesus say? How many words are in the Bible that Jesus says, I want my church to go out and build me great buildings? Ready? Zzz, keep on smashing. That's how many. 0. Really? Well, why are they building all these great buildings then? Why are we building these small buildings then? Because in some ways they could be a useful tool. Remember the analogy we used to use always at Palm Square, those of you who were there in those days, that we have outgrown the usefulness of this tool. Well, a church building is a tool. But the greatness of the edifice does not manifest or parallel the conviction of the level of one's faith in one's heart. In fact, there is a portion of the New Testament. I trashed Paul a little earlier. I want to build him up now. Because there is a portion of the New Testament that answers this direct question. That if Christians are charged to build, and they are, then what kind of legacy will their building, that is not the actual structure, but their construction, what will it produce? What are their materials they are to use? And so we turn to this passage we call 1 Corinthians in chapter 3. We'll read just a few of the verses here together this morning. It's in 1 Corinthians, it's in chapter 3, begins in verse 9. By the grace God has given me, this is Paul, again, who writes now. He writes about building. I laid a foundation as an expert builder. Paul was an apostle of God, called particularly to come and work in the New Testament church. And someone else is building on it. He says, I see who's coming after me. You understand that legacy thing then that he's doing? But each one should be careful how he builds, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. See, that's our task. We are engaged in construction. If any man builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, his work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. Look, we could expand that passage in so many different ways. But for this morning, just note these 4 careful principles about guidelines for people who would leave a divine legacy in the new covenant era. Yes, the bottom portion of the worship bulletin, if you want to make the notes. First, and it's obvious, isn't it? Build on the foundation who is Christ. Whatever else the church does, whatever else we go, whatever else we encounter on, our foundation remains Jesus Christ. Without him, we are nothing. We have no We have nothing to construct a life on personally. We have nothing to build a congregation upon, nothing to reach out into the community. We build on him who is Christ. All programs, all endeavors, all projects in my life are evaluated on the basis of, is this built on Christ? If the answer is no, don't build it. Stop it. Just stop it. In the congregation, if this is built on Christ, let's go ahead. If it's not, let's stop it. Let's just not do it. Let's talk people out of it. Number 2, this is kind of the complex part of it all. Assess your construction materials. I don't know, do you have the ability to build on gold? I'm sorry, to build with gold? Built any gold floors lately? Walls? Some of them feel like they cost like gold, right? Oh, we just did a simple remodeling project in my house. Let me tell you, the gold was running hot and heavy. Assess your construction materials. In some locales, it would be appropriate to build with straw and hay, but in some other locales, it would not be. If you're in construction, should you know the quality of your materials that go in? Come on. Just think Chinese drywall. Okay, you got it? All right. So you should know what's going into your structure there. That was number 2. First was build on the foundation who is Christ. Number 2 was assess your construction materials. Number 3 is join in with committed partners, because no one works alone. Have you ever tried to pick up something heavy that's about 10 feet long? It's about this big around and it's 10 feet long and it probably weighs 150 pounds. Have you picked it up by yourself? How rough is that? How's your back feel? How are your knees doing? How's your neck doing? Now, if you have somebody of comparative equal strength to you at the other end of that long 10-foot pole and it weighs 150 pounds, can the two of you pick it up? All right, you see, I'm understanding. So when you're in construction, when you're doing it, solo acts are hard to sustain because sometimes you get down and you need the other person to carry the greater part of the burden than you are able to carry that day. And you say, I owe you for that one. Thanks so much for that help. How nice is that wonderful ability? And number 4, you work toward the long-term goal of honoring Christ for eternity. See, we don't just want New Hope to succeed in this generation. I don't want just New Hope to succeed with this generation. Let's just do our young people, who are coming up right now. I mean, I really want them to succeed. I want them to grow into maturing adults who have their lives together in Christ and are organized, purposeful, spiritual lives, who come of age and grow. But I would like more than that. I would like them to be able to pass on the legacy of Christ to their children and their grandchildren. I believe God works generationally beyond ourselves. And yet some days I'm so focused on me, and the issues of my hour that I've forgotten that God works generationally. I want to encourage you to remember, because it sounds like God really does have this long-term goal as He works with all of us. Family building is just to be followed with the greatness of God. Billy Graham has probably spoken to more people in the history of the world than anyone else about following Christ. At least that was true before the explosion of the internet. I disagree about some of the theological things that this brother has, but let me tell you, I give honor to the fact that Billy Graham has always been faithful with the money and has never engaged in sexual immorality. I love that about that guy. I love his faithfulness. He's written a new book now. It's titled Nearing Home. He's 80 plus. He's suffering with some of the great frailties of age that sometimes come upon us. Some of you remember this from the old pompadour hairdo. Yeah, but this is more what he looks like today. He has written, and in this reflective piece, he wrote about an event that happened in 1985. Seems like it was just the other day that this happened. Perhaps you remember it. It's when Coca-Cola came out with New Coke, that's right. And he talked about how, and maybe you weren't alive then, in 1985, Coca-Cola, a long-established worldwide company, decided that the old formula was no longer the thing. And so with market pressure and excellent research, they went out and they started and branded New Coke hit it. And do you know what the public said? We hate it, and we don't buy it, and we don't like New Coke. You're right, Keith. No, we don't like this. And he said that the trade secret was an attempt to triumph it with new and freshness. Let me tell you, I think this has a lot to do, and Billy Graham's insight is original, mine is not. He says, I think this has a lot to do with growing old. See, old is genuine. Old is authentic. Old is just the way it is. The older generation, I've noticed I have a hard time even hearing the younger generation. I've noticed I have a hard time keeping up. We did a church event not too long ago. And one of the young men in the church, we were picking stuff up, and he came over to me and he said, here, Andy, I'll get that. What do you mean you'll get it? I thought, what do you mean you'll get it? Oh, what do you mean you'll get it? I thought, okay, you can get it. I had my day. See, old is authentic. It's genuine. The generations that follow us, okay, and I'm talking about myself, the generations that follow us are learning about what it means to be old from us, okay? They're learning it. They're saying, this is how an old person behaves. So I'm asking you, if you're closer to leaving that divine legacy than you might have thought, and by the way, you don't always know when you're leaving your legacy, do you? You might think, I'm just going to go to the movies this afternoon. and suddenly a madman breaks into a theater, and your legacy is left. It's time to be thinking about your divine legacy that God would do in your life. Because when you are gone, that legacy is in place. You don't have a chance to have a redo. You don't have a chance to make it all together now. I want you to remember that our congregation is not centered in this building. This is not who we are. Now, I like not being at Palm Square. I don't know about you. I just want to vote again. Let's move. But this is not who we are. We're investing in people and the children and the community around about us. And we're seeking to leave a divine legacy in this community because we don't know how long we have. It may be decades yet. And it may be this afternoon. Just remember this little clip we showed to start worship this morning. May it be a good reminder for you. Pray.
Lately, it seems that we are getting more and more confused about what a church actually is. So let's take some time to set the record straight. Church is not a building, though a building can be used by a church. Church is not a denomination, though a set of beliefs should be important to a church. Church is not about Sunday, though a church should not forsake meeting together. Church is not about one person or personality, though every church should be pastored. And church is not about size or growth, though every church is called to make disciples. So don't think of church as an address or a location, but rather think of church as mobile and on the move. Don't think of church as something built or planted, but rather think of church as something deployed. Don't think of church as where you are for an hour each week, but rather what you are every day of the week, because the church is the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. Feet shouldn't sit still. Hands shouldn't be idle. Feet go. Hands do. This is the church. Church isn't what you're sitting through right now, because you are the church. Now go and be the church.